Okay, everybody, here we go. There we go. All right, everybody, welcome so much to the Good Book Club, our Tuesday night edition, which is our next slide. It's our The Good Book Club for Post-Mormon Dummies. Now, we call it that because as post-Mormons or even nuanced Mormons, there may be some things that we're not quite up to speed on, maybe some things we need to learn, some topics we need to brush up on. So we have these little discussions led by book club members who have sort of an expertise or an interest in these topics. We record these meetings so they're available to us under our The Good Book Club library so we can watch them later. So our The Good Book Club for Post-Mormon Dummies tonight is going to be the wonderful and amazing Daniel Bedell, and he gave us this title here. It is Huntsman versus the Corporation of the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the challenge of suing a multi-billion-dollar corporation that is also a church. So that being said, whew, what a mouthful. Take it away, Daniel.
All right, am I coming through?
Got it.
All right, so as far as questions, want to handle the standard procedure. If you have a question, raise your hand. Unless I tell you, say it's a free-for-all, like there's at least probably the next slide is going to be a free-for-all. Everyone can just talk because we have a lot of stuff to talk about that one. All right, so a couple of preliminaries. One, this presentation contains no legal advice. I am a lawyer, but I am not your lawyer. So purely for educational and entertainment purposes only. So
Dad, just like a lawyer, I gotta say, just like a lawyer, only a lawyer would say something like that.
I knew you'd appreciate it. So this title, so I picked this title for a reason. I wanted it to be nice and long. One, it mimics the church's name, and how always saying that is a mouthful. But two, there's really a lot to unpack. And I was looking through the Huntsman case, this dichotomy of fighting a multi-billion-dollar corporation, which is hard because they have lots of resources and they have lots of money and they can hire lots of lawyers, and they can put a ton of time in and they can just throw money at it. And that's really hard to fight. But then on the other hand, they're also a church. So they get to hide behind the First Amendment over and over and over. And it's a super difficult problem. All right. So as a preliminary, I wanted to talk about what is tithing, in case there's somebody on this call that is not a lifetime member of the Mormon Church. Talk about what it is, because we're going to be talking about this over and over and over. And so this slide is kind of a free for all. So people just jump in with things you want to talk about. But tithing inside the Mormon Church, it's 10% of your increase is the way it's defined. What the heck does increase mean? Well, who knows? And this is one of the things that the Mormon Church kind of likes to keep open, because they're like, basically just give until it hurts. So if you feel like you should be giving more, it's probably more. So you'll end up with people telling you it's 10% of your gross, but then people say, no, it's 10% of your net or whatever you fight. But they really like to push everybody into their own definition of it. This is kind of how they price discriminate. They tithing discriminate in the church. So however guilty you feel, however much tithing you feel like you should give, that's how much you should give. So with the tithing, since the late 1960s, the church has amassed liquid assets, investments of over 150 billion. They're not really public about that, but from leaks, that's about how much they have.
That's billion, not million, like he said on the in the press conference.
Press conference, that's right.
Did you notice how he conveniently changed it from billion to million?
Yeah, well, yeah, I said I doubt it. And then the church, when they published it, changed it back to billion. So they're like, oh no, he didn't say less than 100 million.
Yeah.
So it changed back. All right. Now, this is the one I'm going to rely on Rebecca a little bit, but why do people pay tithing? Well, it's actually required in the Mormon Church. They like to say it's sort of a voluntary thing, but it's really required. You cannot get a temple recommend, a permission to go into their temples where they perform their highest ordinances, these ordinances that are necessary for salvation inside Mormon doctrine. If you don't pay your tithing, if you don't pay that 10% that they ask you to do, you cannot get that. So you're locked out of that. I think you're also locked out of most callings in the church, which are sort of these markers, these symbols that you're a good member. You know, everybody sees your callings and they see what you're doing. That's how people kind of know who's good and doing the right things. And I don't believe you could actually be advanced or get the priesthood if you're not paying your tithing, which the priesthood is, again, another one of those markers inside the Mormon church. And they actually have verification for that. Like, they're explaining tithing to people outside the church. They're like, yeah, but how would they ever know? You know, if you pass around a tray and you put in your money, nobody ever knows. It's all sort of secret. It's anonymous. And I'm like, well, that's not the way it works inside the Mormon church. First of all, when you pay your tithing, you connect your name and your member record number to it, and it all gets kept in like a database somewhere, whether it's at the church or on a local level. You have all this record of your tithing payments. And then they ask you about it. You have temple recommend interviews, you have just random worthiness interviews, and you have interviews for callings. And they're always asking you, are you paying your tithing? Are you paying that tithing? Anything to add, Rebecca, about tithing? I think you're making a list of all the things should be locked out of. All right.
No, it affects you in a secular way too, because if you go to BYU and you don't pay it,
that's true.
You can be kicked out of school. I worked at BYU where you have to pay it. One year, I've told this story before, but I told my bishop, I'm sorry, I'm newly married. I work at BYU. I don't make very much money. I'm a partial tithe payer. He told me he would have to call my boss. I was going to lose my job unless I paid. I quickly put it on a credit card. So it definitely I think I'm probably still paying it off. And it definitely bleeds into every aspect of your life. It hangs over your head like a dark, dark cloud.
One last thing I'd like to say about tithing is that it hasn't always been this way inside the Mormon church. It wasn't initially required this way. It only came about at the time when they really had a lot of financial problems. And it was really promised as if it's stated as if this is a temporary thing. While we kind of get ourselves out of this financial dire straits we're in, everybody should be paying tithing and paying a generous tithing. But there will come a day when we won't have to do it anymore. And I think people are still waiting for that day.
That quote is not used very much. So I think we have a few hands up if we want to. Ren, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, quick question, just a couple of things. Also with tithing, you declare your tithing at the end of the year in tithing settlement to your bishop.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
So it's just another way that they keep tabs on whether you're doing it or not, right? One question I had is, what is considered your bullet point here of the liquid assets? What are we considering liquid assets?
That's just stocks and things like that. So not their real estate.
You mean a third of Florida?
Okay, so yeah, because I mean, I'm a financial guy, but the liquid assets typically means like it's any receivables that they get, cash. So we're considering liquid assets. So they could convert all their stock, I guess, today to cash if they sold it, I guess is basically what we're saying.
Yeah. That's what I'm assuming.
That's crazy. Bruce, did you have a question?
It really just, really just want to differentiate it from their real estate holdings, so they're non-real estate holdings or, stocks and other things like that, about 150 at the last estimate. But in real estate, I think it's way more, but I don't think we have any sort of estimate for that.
Yeah, I had a couple quick ones. Also, the temple recommend if you don't have it, you cannot go to your children's or a family member's wedding. I have stood outside of the building for every family wedding ever. And I've stood outside with the non-member parts of our family and the other unworthies and stuff. So, you can't go to weddings. And then I saw something, don't know if it's true, but this was before this latest stock correction, that somebody estimated that the church made during the last run up during the pandemic of the stock market, 21 billion on their portfolio. And I think I've seen where it says the church takes in 7 billion and it takes 6 billion to run the church. And so they're kind of at the perpetual funding stage, at least that's kind of what I've read. Don't know if it's true, but
Nelson's.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask if, so Rebecca, your experience was that you were told that you're going to lose your job if you didn't do it, and you put on a credit card.
Yeah.
And I've run into stories where the bishop found out that you were going to put it on a credit card, and they said, no, you're at zero now, pay 10% from here forward.
It's
So like,
bishop
is this like a
roulette.
bishop roulette thing?
It's really bishop roulette. Some don't care, and you see stories on Reddit all the time or other social media where, you know, they made them pay back tithing. It's interesting if people aren't aware. Lots of times you do have a kid going through the temple. People will quickly pay up to be able to attend. It's hanging over your head. We've got a wedding. We're going to pay for a couple months. We're going to attend for a couple months so we can get this recommend. So it does. It hangs over your head like a dark cloud. So
does the church actually take a credit card? Is there a way
I
to
believe that we took like a cash advance. So
Oh,
I'm
I
saying
see.
we got some, yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
I was
Just
like, I
like-
didn't know.
Right? We're still
Yeah,
paying.
but he definitely threatened. He goes, you know, you work at BYU. I'm going to have to let your supervisor know because I'm supposed to be giving you an ecclesiastical endorsement to work there. And I can't give you that endorsement. You have not paid. And I said, well, the reason I can't pay is because I make so little money at freaking, sorry, don't even get me started, BYU. So, it's a chicken and an egg scenario. But yeah, there are just many different points where they can get you with it.
All right. So from the very first slide, who remembers what was the name of the church, the full name that James Huntsman put on the complaint? Anybody remember that? They can say the full name of the church.
Is it the corporation of the presiding bishop? Gosh, I wrote it so many times.
That's a different one. It's actually close. It's the corporation of the president
the president
of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And you may be like, well, that's sort of weird. Like that's a funny name for a church, right? The corporation of the president. Well, we're going to get to why it was named that. It's actually has changed in 2021, but we'll get to that name. So this is a little bit, we're going to go through some of the corporate history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So during Joseph Smith's life, the Mormon Church was actually incorporated under 2 states and possibly a third. The records are kind of sketchy, but they were trying to find a good fit because Joseph Smith was really looking for a church, but he also not just a church, but he wanted like a church and a government and a corporation and everything. You know, you look at the way the Mormon Church was different from a lot of other churches at the time, and they were trying to be everything all at once. And they were trying to find a good sort of entity, like a legal entity status for that would fit, and they had a lot of trouble with it. In 1851, out in the Utah Territory, which is completely controlled by the church and by Brigham Young and the Mormons, they passed a new corporate charter that fit them pretty well. Basically, it's like the church is a church and it can do everything and have all these things. And that was working just fine for the Mormon Church until in 1878, when the U.S. Supreme Court held in Reynolds versus the United States. They're like, you know what? We don't like polygamy and we think it's bad. And it turns out we don't think that freedom of religion should protect polygamy. They said the fact that you have a religious duty to engage in plural marriage is not a valid defense to prosecution for violating state laws against polygamy. So they're like, well, you're not following the rules, but the church fights back and they go back and forth for quite a bit. And in 1890, Congress disincorporated the Mormon Church. They said, all right, your corporation is dissolved and we're going to seize your assets. And so soon thereafter, the church got a revelation. Any guesses as to how long it was before the church got a revelation after they were disincorporated?
One day.
Yeah, it was like I think it was like a month or something, or weeks after. They're like, oh, revelation. Same year, Wilford Rudolph says, you know what? We're going to suspend polygamy. Kind of. So what they really did is they stopped in public doing any new polygamous sealings. They kept doing it kind of in secret, and they sent people to Canada and Mexico to keep doing that, keep it up. Then in 1896, Utah became a state, and the church leaders found a good way to finally have a good corporate entity under some of the corporate laws that had developed in the United States. They had this thing called a corporation soul that had evolved by then. But the corporation soul it's a legal entity consisting of a single incorporated office. So basically all of the assets and everything are owned by this office. And can anyone guess where this came from? Like what was the context under which it came up? It's really interesting because it came from the Catholic Church. This is something that the Mormon Church borrowed from the Catholic Church. So, Melinda, go ahead and let me know if anybody has their hand up, because I can't really see everybody with the presentations I have going on. So go ahead and shout out if someone has their hands up. I can't see all the pictures. Anyway, so this is something they borrowed from the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church did it because they would have these dioceses that would own all these assets. And when the Archbishop died, they didn't want to have to like reincorporate or do something like that. So it was just in the office of the bishop. And so the Mormon Church found this and they fell in love with it. And they created all these corporations, and the one at the head of the church for a long time was the corporation of the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So when the prophet died, a new president came in. All right, and then just to close the loop on that polygamy thing, in 1904, that's when Joseph S. Smith disavowed polygamy before the United States Congress, and he issued the second manifesto, really like ending polygamy.
I think
Daniel, we do have a
Nelson
couple
and
of-
Brad that have comments.
So if you borrow something from the great abominable church of the devil, what does that make you?
There's always an excuse, like take from Caesar what is Caesar's or something,
So Daniel, just a quick question. How unusual is the corporation soul as far as a church organization? Do other churches use that? Is that common? Or is there a reason because why the church and the Catholic Church do this particular structure?
So it is fairly common in churches now, but there's a really good reason why the Catholic Church was the first one to do it. And the reason why the Mormon Church has really latched onto it and loved it, and it's because of money. If you're a church that doesn't have a lot of assets, it's not a big deal, It's once you have all these assets and you really need to protect them and make sure you don't face tax liability at someone's death or at transitions. So it's large amounts of money inside of a church, which really pushes them into corporation souls.
Interesting. Ran, I think you had another comment.
Yeah, I was just gonna chime in there too. With all entities have to have some sort of structure. So whether it's a corporation or an LLC or a sole proprietorship or something like that, the corporation allows them that protection from the individual as well. So it creates the entity that then has protection. Maybe you're going to go into that a little bit, but then it's the tax exempt status that really kind of, and looks like that's where you're going next. So just wanted to add my 2 there.
No, that's a good point. And you drew my mind. Another major benefit of a corporation soul, and this is why the churches like it also, because with a corporation soul, unlike other corporations, there's no requirement for a board of directors or reporting, because it's basically just a corporation in the office of one single person. So they don't have a board of directors, they don't have corporate records, they don't have minutes of meetings and all these other things that are required for a lot of corporations.
Landon, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so with all this big deal about what the correct name of the church is, what is the correct name of the church? Is it the corporation of the president of the church, also doing business as, also known as? What is the correct or proper name legally of the church?
Well, legally, sometime in 2021, the church actually changed its official corporate name to just be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So, and I believe it's still a corporation soul, but for whatever reason, the laws had changed so that they were allowed to do that. They could just call it the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But up until recently, they just didn't care, right? To them, it didn't matter that they had this corporate entity that wasn't named the same, but maybe it's because, you know, Russell is really concerned about that, or maybe it's just that they're like, you know, it's a lot of bad PR to have our church named the corporation of the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But in 2021, they did actually change that.
Had you heard, Daniel, I had read some things when they made that change, that there's actually verbiage that says when the religious arm of the church were it to disband, the corporation would continue, which is crazy to think that the church is just seen as the religious arm. It really is a monster.
It is. And we'll see some slides that hint a little bit at that, in addition to the hundreds of billions we've talked about. So I have a couple of slides here about, any more hands up? All right, a couple of slides here about some of the corporate shenanigans that have been going on. And in the notes to the slide, you see the links to where these quotes come from. So this dual structure allows the Mormon church to optimize its assets and capital management by moving money and assets between their tax exempt and regular businesses as loans, donations, or investments. One side of these transactions, the side where the money is made, is mostly obscured from view because churches are not required to file financial statements. The Mormon church doesn't do so voluntarily either, like other churches and charities do. The church's lack of transparency about its finances has drawn criticism from commentators who consider its practices too secretive. The disclosure of the 100 billion church-controlled fund has led to criticism that its wealth may be excessive. Critical commentators have asserted the church's use of its corporate structure to optimize its assets and capital management by moving money and assets between its tax-exempt and regular businesses as loans, donations, or investments. And as we were talking about earlier, the church has been accused of significant tax evasion in Australia. According to an investigation by Australian newspapers, the church's corporation, LDS Charities Australia, was the recipient of nearly 70 million in donations annually, which is tax exempt under Australian law, as opposed to religious donations, which are not, but appeared to actually spend very little of it on charity. Tithing and other religious donations were routed through the corporation to ensure they would be tax exempt. So let's pause a little bit on this one. So Australian law says donations to a church are not tax exempt, but donations to a charity are. So the church set up a charity, LDS Charities Australia, and asked all tithing to be donated to that, or set it up so the tithing was donated to LDS Charities Australia. But then that tithing was just sent to the church. And a very small portion was used for any charitable work that they did in Australia.
Marty Lynn and Kevin, did you guys have a question? Oops.
So that's really gross. I'm just appalled that they don't follow the laws of the land. But the other thing that I wanted to add, or the question I had, was in the United States, I would think that there would be laws about transparency, even for churches. So you were saying some churches and charities will voluntarily give up information, even though they don't have to.
Yes.
I'm curious why it's not a requirement for every organization. Like, I would think that a church has nothing to hide, so it would be okay to like make it legal that they have, or not legal, make it illegal for them to not be transparent, whatever, if that makes sense.
It does. No, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And first, I totally agree with you. The status is not the law. It is not required. And it's actually an issue that came up. We're not going to talk too much about it, but it's an issue in this Huntsman case. One of the things Huntsman was pushing for is more transparency from the church. And the Mormon church's response was that would basically allow people to second guess the operation of our church, and that for freedom of religion, we shouldn't have to disclose what we're doing. I don't know how it hurts. I mean, it's a bizarre thing that Rochelle, my wife, laughed out loud when she read it. She was like, they're asking us to be more transparent and tell everybody what we're doing. We can't do that because then people would see what we're doing.
That's bizarre, because you would think that they would have nothing to hide, and
Agreed.
They would be able to have the gumption to say, well, this is what God told me to do. And so they just do whatever it was anyway, whether they were viewed as being not a good thing. That's crazy.
it is crazy. And that's the status of the law. Again, one of the things about a corporation sole is they don't have to make disclosures. They don't have to be, keep public records or anything like that. And the church has even argued that it would violate their freedom of religion to make them do that.
That's crazy. I think Melinda has a comment or question, and then Ren.
So I was curious about the members in Australia. Do we know if they knew that they were donating to this LDS Charities Australia, or were they donating to the church and then the church in turn donated to the LDS Charities Australia? And then if they didn't know, or even if they did know, have we heard any kind of talk from the members as far like their feelings on this? I mean, or is it kind of like the United States where probably not everyone in the church is aware of this, right? Like they're good at hiding things.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know what the members' feelings of this are. I do know that Australian church membership is exceedingly small and is shrinking. So
we don't know if they knew.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they knew.
Do you know
Did
what
they
the
write
process
their-
was? Yeah, do you know if
Did they
they,
write their check out to LDS
Yeah.
Charities Australia as opposed to so-and-so Fifth Ward? I mean, that would kind of be telling. They might go, But I know in Europe, there's some different ways that you pay too. I mean, I think they kind of do workarounds wherever the laws don't allow them to be straightforward. So I don't know. That's a
Yeah.
good question. Ren, did you still have a question? Your hand's gone.
Yeah, I thought I did. I thought it got answered, but I was just, my understanding was that 501c3s are required to disclose certain financial information. It's whatever they report on the Form 990. Most of that is, I believe most of those are public. Any person can go search a 990 for a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And so I don't know if there may be some other law for churches that I may not be aware of. Just a thought.
We have a profit, so we're exempt.
Yeah.
I actually looked into that, and it is, if you are a church, you are exempt. You are not the same as a 501c. You do not have to file, period, if you're a church.
that's because Landon wants to open his own church.
Yeah,
Of
I'm
course
looking
you,
at
Landon.
opening my
Why did
own
you look
church and
into
not
that?
filing anything, so.
Melinda's going to be the minister, and they were
I am.
gonna have their house was going to be the parsonage. They had it all planned out. So if you guys zoom in from jail a year or so from now, we'll understand why.
Right?
Okay.
I want to.
Bruce, did you have a question?
Yeah, Landon and Melinda, at what point are you going to start marrying 14-year-olds? That's how churches go.
Eventually.
All right, actually playing off of that lack of disclosure, this was put together in the early 1990s by the Arizona Republic. This was them trying to piece together the corporate maze of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And, like I said, it's changed since then. Some things have been consolidated, like the corporation of the presiding bishop is gone. And some things have been renamed, but there's no transparency, so nobody knows. But it's probably still something like this, where they move stuff around, trying to take full advantage of being a corporation and a church. So when it comes to making profit, they're a corporation, but when it comes to paying taxes, they're a church. And you'll actually see that funny distinction is used in the Huntsman case when we get there. The idea of, oh, we're using corporate profits for this. We're not using church money. This is corporate profits that we're used for this, not church money.
And can they flip flop whenever they want to use one, they're that, and when it benefits them to be the other, they're that? I mean, can they literally in the court system just be one or the other depending on what benefits them?
Unfortunately, it seems like yes. Like one legal principle is that money is fungible. You can, $5 here is the same as $5 is there. It doesn't really matter. Those money can be transferred back and forth. And with the corporate structure and this interplay with churches that we've set up in this country, really you can, you know, there are some rules that govern the transfer of assets back and forth, but with hordes of lawyers, you can figure out ways to pretty much do anything you want.
So let me get this straight. They get the benefit of being a church, so they don't have to worry about any kind of multi-level marketing defense on different things when they're trying to get money from people. But they don't have to pay the taxes like a normal corporation or a multi-level marketing business would have to pay.
Yes, and I don't know how everything is done in the church, but here would be a possible example of how it happens. So you have a church, or you have one of the business entities, you know, say Deseret Book or something, and maybe they're I don't know if they are, but maybe say they're a for-profit and they're making money. Well, what happens at the end of the year is they have all this money, and like, we're gonna have to pay taxes on that. So what they'll do is they say, well, under our licensing agreement from the church, we have to pay them $500 million for the ability to be the official affiliate of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so they pay all that money to the church, which is a nonprofit, which is the church, and they've just, you know, licensed with them. So for the intellectual property of licensing the official bookstore of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, all the profits go from Deseret Books to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then at the end of the year, lo and behold, the profit of Deseret Books is zero or next to nothing, and they don't pay taxes on it. So
I would think with property, it's very similar. The church would get a donation of property. The church holds it. They don't pay any property tax on it. And then they all of a sudden announce a temple and they want to build a bunch of houses. Now they transfer it to their for-profit group. They sell it off, make all the money. All the money they make as profit then gets donated back to the church. And the church just made all that money and paid no taxes the entire time on all that property they held.
yeah.
And meanwhile, we have higher property taxes because nobody paid property taxes on all that property that they held, which is a significant amount in Utah, at least.
So Nelson, I see your comment in there. I said hordes with a D. Hordes.
Well, I just wasn't sure. I wasn't sure.
Little of both, little of both.
I was gonna say the other would be redundant. So all right. So I want to give before we get into the Huntsman case, I want to go through a little bit about some of like religious freedom in the United States. All right. So religious freedom, really we find the foundation for that in the First Amendment of the Constitution. Number one. So this is the text of the First Amendment right there. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. You know, and the rest of it is the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, or the right to peaceably assemble and petition the government. But those first two lines, that is it. So the first one, no law respecting the establishment of religion. That's called the Establishment Clause. That means the government can't favor a religion. You can't pick one, you can't give special treatment to one, you can't establish a religion. And two, you can't prohibit the free exercise of. That's the Free Exercise Clause. It means you can't stop people from exercising their religion. That is it. That is really the foundation of all religious freedom, those two things, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Any hands up on that one? I can't see. Good.
Just taking it in.
Absorb it.
Absorbing it.
All right. So originally the First Amendment applied only to the federal government. I mean, you saw the text of it right there, right? You say Congress, that's Congress. So it says Congress can't do it. So it only applied to the federal government. It means the states could do whatever they wanted, theoretically, with that, unless they had their own constitution added in there. But in this Gitlow versus New York 1925 case, that used the 14th Amendment to apply the First Amendment to the states as well. So it said, hey, this will apply to state actions as well. So here's 14th Amendment, Section 1. You can read that if you want. But this part right here is actually fascinating to me because I don't know if any of you have heard about Dallin H. Oakes's argument about why the destruction of the printing press in Nauvoo was A-OK. So he wrote a whole like scholarly legal article about it. And his whole argument was, well, the 14th Amendment wasn't ratified until 1868. So at the time of the destruction of the printing press, it did not violate freedom of the press, because freedom of the press only applied to the federal government. This was not the federal government. This was, the Nauvoo, whatever, the police, the Nauvoo Legion or whatever it was, that came and destroyed the printing press. So in that sense, it did not violate the First Amendment, the freedom of press. Ergo, no problem at all, which, the argument completely annoys the fact that it was, unlawful destruction of personal property and everything else. But his argument was that, hey, since the 14th Amendment had been ratified, it was A-okay. All right, 1878, Reynolds versus the United
I was
States.
just going to say, by that, then they couldn't have been persecuted for their religion, because only the federal government could have done that.
That's right. There's like, yeah, it was Congress. Congress is the only one that could violate your freedom of religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in that sense, the extermination order wasn't a problem. Reynolds v. United States, 1878. This was the Supreme Court case about polygamy. And the Supreme Court ruled the First Amendment forbids the government from regulating belief, but not from actions such as marriage. So in this case, they're like, yeah, we can't tell you what to believe, but we can tell you not to marry multiple women. So this was testing the bounds, because the church was arguing, oh, you're clearly violating my free exercise of religion because my religion requires me. That's what the church actually said. We have a religious duty to marry lots of women. And in drawing one of the lines, the Supreme Court said, nope, we can regulate that action, but we can't regulate your belief. Right, in 1961, Brofield v. Brown, this was about a blue law. And blue laws were the laws that allowed certain types of activity, only certain types of businesses to remain open on Sunday. Usually it was like alcohol and bars had to be closed. Regulated types of businesses that could remain open on Sunday. And a cause of action or a case was brought by members of the Orthodox Jewish community, because they said, that really kind of hurts our businesses, because, we have to close our businesses from Friday night to all through nightfall on Saturday. And then if, we can't open our businesses on Sunday, we're kind of locked out. But the court held the blue laws did not violate their free exercise clause. And they based it, they said, because really this has a secular basis. I think it was just cleverly crafted, but I don't know what the secular basis would be for requiring certain businesses to be closed on Sunday. But they said, hey, it was a secular basis. Sunday is the day when everybody's out with their families, and Sunday is the day when everybody, you don't want to see bars and stuff. Kids don't have school and we don't want bars anyway. But they said it was secular, and so it was fine. All right, Lemon versus Kurtzman in 71. This one, the Supreme Court struck down a Pennsylvania law allowing the state to reimburse Catholic schools for the salaries of teachers who taught in those schools. And this was an important case because they came up with the Lemon test for determining when a state or federal law violates the Establishment Clause. And this is the Lemon test. So it's this three-part test. So a law related to religious practices was constitutional if it had a secular purpose, and it neither advanced nor inhibited religion, and did not foster excessive government entanglement with religion. All right, this is a good one. I like the name of this church, the Church of the Lukami Babalu. So the court considered whether ordinances passed by the city of Hialeah, Florida, banning animal sacrifice violated the free exercise clause. Now, you would think, right, if anything is going to be A-okay, it's a law banning animal sacrifice, right? You're like, that's gotta be A-okay, But the text of these laws and the way they operated showed they were not neutral and generally applicable, but instead were targeted at the Santeria religion. So in unanimous decision, the court held that because the ordinances were designed to persecute or oppress religion or its practices, they violated the free exercise clause. All right. And then in 2005, you probably remember these were the 10 Commandment cases that came up to the Supreme Court, and they went two different ways. So in the first case, Van Orden versus Perry, the court ruled the display of a 6-foot 10 Commandments monument at the Texas State Capitol was constitutional. But then in McCreary County versus ACLU, the court ruled that 2 large framed copies of the 10 Commandments in Kentucky courthouses violated the First Amendment. So again, probably some factual differences in those, but they seem pretty contradictory. All right, so now moving on to our case. A little bit of background about James Huntsman, who brought this case. So James Huntsman is the son of John Huntsman Sr. John Huntsman Sr., shown there on the left, he founded Huntsman Chemical Corporation, which was later renamed to Huntsman Corporation, which is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. John Huntsman was one of Mormonism's first billionaires. He and his wife, Karen, were married for over 58 years and had 9 children. At the time of his death, they had 56 grandchildren and 19 great-grandchildren. All right. And as you're going to see as we go through this, the Huntsmans are pretty much as close to Mormon royalty as we get. So John Huntsman Jr., number 2 there, the former U.S. governor and the U.S. ambassador to China for nearly 2 years under President Obama. He is, and then Peter is the president and CEO of the Huntsman Corp, founded by his father. Christina, she administers the endowment that John Huntsman Sr. started for the road home to provide services for the homeless, a fund totaling $9 million now. David Huntsman, he is the child who looks like they're going to devote their life to church service. So he is a former mission president, and I believe currently in Area 70. All right, Paul Huntsman. He's in charge of the Huntsman family investments, seeking to funnel profits to cancer research and other philanthropic endeavors, and is also the owner and publisher of the Salt Lake Tribune, which I believe the church now owns, right? But anyway, or has a big investment in. All right, James Huntsman, who is the one that filed this lawsuit. James, he's a movie maker and a member of the Screen Actors Guild, and he's produced a couple of films. He actually prodded his father, John Sr., to play a cameo role in each of his movies. So he now works on the distribution side of the movie business. And he has a sort of, it says, following his father, in a sense, whose first venture was selling music in grocery stores. Jennifer Huntsman, she oversees Huntsman Educational Awards. And the last living child is Mark, who actually suffered brain damage at birth, and despite his limitations, he plays a role in the Huntsman Empire. He is commonly seen in the halls of the Huntsman Corporation, greeting everyone that he sees and talking to everyone. So again, seemingly the perfect Mormon family and Mormon royalty. All right, so now on to the case. James versus the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. All right, so James Huntsman filed his complaint in March of 2021, and he filed it in the Central District of California, which was actually a pretty good choice of court. I don't know if any of you have heard about the case, the Gaddy versus the Church case that was filed in Utah. And that seems like an unfortunate place to file a complaint against the Church of Jesus Christ. I think you're going to have a hard time finding a dispassionate, unbiased jury. But all right. So in James's complaint, the first thing he alleges is he's paid millions of dollars in tithing. So not tithing on millions of dollars, he has paid millions of dollars in tithing. All right. And he makes a claim for fraud. He says, the church told me specifically that tithing funds were not going to be used for commercial endeavors, including City Creek. And another commercial endeavor that he brings up is the beneficial life insurance bailout. And he says new evidence, specifically the evidence that came from the IRS whistleblower who was working for Ensign Peak Investments, shows that was not true. It shows that money from the church went directly to City Creek. All right. The way things work in a lawsuit is the plaintiff will file a complaint, and then the defendant will file an answer. And the church answered in May 2021. And in that answer, they denied almost all the allegations. An answer is usually kind of a really boring document inside a court. You just go through and you say, paragraph 1, we admit that this is our name. 2, we admit this is our address. And then we deny this. We lack sufficient information on this. And so basically they deny all the things, and then they state their affirmative defenses.
Yeah, we have some people who aren't members. City Creek is the very extreme luxury mall built in downtown Salt Lake across from the temple. It kind of was a urban renewal thing that cost a lot. I've heard $1.5 billion or more, and stuff. And Beneficial Life was the church's life insurance company, and I think it may not be in business any longer. But yeah, were both commercial operations.
Exactly.
And a lot of
Even as
people
a
can't
true
afford to shop at City Creek because they pay tithing.
Even as a true believing Mormon, I always called it the great and spacious building.
Yeah. I mean, by all accounts, it's beautiful. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful mall, but the idea that, church funds were used to fund the mall sort of behind the back of its members, that just didn't sit right with a lot of people.
And it sells all the things we were told not to use. You can go buy beautiful underwear at Victoria's Secret, and you can get alcoholic drinks at the restaurants, and all the top end luxury items that we were told to stay away from as members that you didn't need. And yeah, it's disgusting even when I was a true believing member, I went and I was going, this just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Well, the defense of it is they had to protect the temple. They had to build up the infrastructure with very high-end businesses so that, for example, the homeless population didn't encroach on the temple, or tent cities. They had to make it secure with very high-end, high-quality business. That is a defense that I've heard a lot of TBMs give. We have to protect the neighborhood and protect the temple.
Right, which is exactly what Christ taught. I mean, I remember him saying
Totally.
that. Yeah.
Completely. Keep those people out. Yeah.
Wow. All right. The next thing that happened was in August, shortly after answering, the church filed a motion for summary judgment. And what a motion for summary judgment is in federal court, the specific rule is that if the movement shows that there's no genuine dispute as to any material fact, the movement is entitled to judgment as a matter of law. So basically, this is at the very outset of the case. You haven't done any discovery. We haven't taken any, real depositions. We haven't exchanged information. So you're just saying, hey, they've alleged these things. Even if all those things were true, their claim fails. They haven't stated a claim on which they could get relief. So they filed this, and here's the reason they put in there. They said, 1, the First Amendment bars the claim. We can't be sued because of the First Amendment. This is the fraud that he's alleging is totally barred by the First Amendment. 2, they said no reasonable juror could find that plaintiff justifiably be relied on any misrepresentation. So this gets into the elements of fraud. So we alleged fraud, which requires a couple of things. So 1, a knowingly false representation. 2, an intent to deceive. 3, justifiable reliance on the part. And 4, damages. And so they're going to say no reasonable juror could find that James Huntsman justifiably be relied on any of these alleged misrepresentations. And 2, related to that, he could say that no reasonable juror could find a misrepresentation. They could say, we never lied. We only gave carefully worded denials, and nobody can be misled by that. All right. And I don't think I updated that date, but anyway, shortly thereafter, the court granted summary judgment. And the first thing they said is, you know what? The First Amendment doesn't bar your claims. They said this is purely a secular dispute. So this complaint was carefully drafted to avoid that. So if you're familiar with the Gaddy case that's in Utah that I brought up earlier, one of the problems they faced is they said the church lied to us. the church said, for instance, that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon by looking at these plates, and you know, they had the plates in front of him and he translated it. Well, it turns out that now they're telling us it was a stone in the hat and other things like that. And the court was really reluctant. They said, you know what, we can't really try those things because now we're getting into like veracity of claims of the church. You know, you're kind of getting into belief claims. Like if you sued us saying all the Christian churches say that Jesus Christ rose from the dead after 3 days, and then you'd be like, but scientifically we know people don't rise from the dead, therefore I think the churches are committing fraud. They're like, we're not going to adjudicate whether or not Jesus Christ rose from the dead after 3 days. We're going to stay away from that. And that's sort of what they're saying in the Gaddy case. But here they're like, no. He is basically saying the church, you know, all he's doing is saying fraud. The church made a misrepresentation. They said that no funds, tithing funds would be used for City Creek. And they did. That's purely secular. You know, is that the case? So this is about a misrepresentation and how the church would use its funds, not about the use. So he's not saying, you know, he isn't alleging, I think the use was wrong. The church should never use these funds for commercial stuff, and that's why I'm suing them. He's saying, no, it was a misrepresentation, and that's why I'm suing them. So that's pretty secular. We don't have to get into the inner workings of the church to figure that out. All right, so he won on that one, but then he lost on this. And this is getting a little bit into the dichotomy, you know, he loses on the church thing, but because he had worked so hard to avoid the church problems, he loses on this misrepresentation. So they said no reasonable jury could find that the church made a misrepresentation. They point out, they say, Gordon Hinckley, quote, explain the earnings from invested reserve tithing funds would be used. So he gets up there in conference and he says, no tithing funds will be used for this. He goes, we will, you know, but then somewhere in there, he's like, we will be using earnings from invested reserve funds, you know, tithing funds for this, but no tithing funds will be used for this. So the church pointed that out. They're like, he explained it right there. 2, they quoted, no reasonable juror could conclude Hinckley's statement was false. So they said, well, it wasn't false. He said no tithing funds would be used, not no reserve tithing funds would be used. And then this is a quote about Nielsen, who was the whistleblower. And they said that appeal to Nielsen, who filed a declaration in support of James Huntsman, said Nielsen here conflates tithing funds with earnings on invested tithing funds, which I don't know. It seems easy to conflate those two to me, but the court wasn't having it. All right. And again, this.
I remember Hinckley saying it was on reserve tithing funds. I remember him saying it came from reserve funds of the church, which how could anyone with that structure of corporation versus church and all those different funds have any idea that a reserve fund of the church meant a tithing fund of the church when it has so many shell companies and funds? That's what was confusing to me.
Yeah. Well, so apparently somewhere the church has it and good evidence for it that Hinckley did explain it would be reserve tithing fund, like earnings from invested reserve tithing funds. And so they said, well, since he said that, you couldn't be confused. And the fact that James was relying on this whole statement too, the first part where he said, no tithing funds will be used for City Creek. But then he says, you know, in a quieter voice, earnings from invested reserve tithing funds will be used. All right. And this is like part that
and isn't that a statement that would really be revelatory coming from God as opposed to from the attorney?
So this is the part here that really I find super interesting, because this is going back to the interplay. You know, he carefully crafted his arguments not to run afoul of the First Amendment, but because he did that, they said he didn't have enough evidence. And then where some of the evidence comes in, they're like, well, if we were to look at that other evidence, it doesn't actually help, and here's why. For instance, plaintiff argues that tithing funds and earnings on investment tithing funds are two sides of the same financial coin. But they said, no, Hinckley expressly distinguishes the two. Those aren't the same thing. And then they say plaintiff's argument effectively asks the court to define the term tithing funds. The First Amendment bars plaintiff's argument. So they're like, we can't define tithing funds because that's for the church to define it, and that's a matter of their free exercise of religion. And so we can't get in there and define the way that the church uses tithing funds. I'm blown away by this, actually. I think this is crazy, but this is where those two sides are coming in. You know, they're like, oh, you can't make them define this. So they get to be squirrely about it, and they get to play both sides of the tithing argument. But then when asked, like, well, they should put up or shut up, they should define this. And the court says, well, we can't define that because that would violate.
Yeah, because they would certainly define it if I said all my earnings that I got, that I spent, what I spent at Walmart was tithing. I gave my tithing money to Walmart. The IRS would say baloney and throw me in jail. I can't define what I give to Walmart as tithing, and the court would say that's not tithing. So they certainly can define it in my case. Why can't they define it in the church's case?
Well, I think what the court would say is, well, that's interesting, but the IRS doesn't ask about tithing. The IRS asks about your donations to charity. They never once use the word tithing in IRS forms. So what you're saying is, so if you were to give your money to Walmart's charitable foundation, then A-okay, you can take that off. But, you know, so that's the crazy thing, you know. I completely understand what you're saying, but it's really semantics. And they're saying that tithing, the word tithing is actually an ecclesiastical thing. This is not a legal construct. The meaning of tithing is completely ecclesiastical. And essentially the Mormon church has complete ownership. They're their own lexicographer when it comes to what tithing means. They own that word. And they added here, determining whether the term tithing funds encompasses earnings on invested tithing funds would require an analysis of church doctrines and teachings. This is a quote from the court. So this is the Central District of California. And I'm blown away by this. Like, wait, what? You can't look at the evidence of what they said and say, well, that was a misrepresentation. They say, no, basically, you know, if the church says this is tithing, that's what tithing is. It's crazy.
I think Nelson has his hand up.
Oh, Nelson, yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, so I've not read any of the pleadings, and oftentimes when you're in federal court, I mean, in any court, and you've got a summary judgment motion, you'll find that the ruling by the judge will adopt some of the language from one side or the other's argument.
That's true.
To what degree then was the court accepting arguments that were made by the church versus, and then the other thing you'll find a lot of times is the judges or their law clerks, whichever one's doing it, will do their own research, and they will kind of ignore both sides' arguments and come up with their own decision, not really incorporating what either one said. To what degree is the judge's order in this adopting language from the church along these arguments, or is it stuff that was really not raised that the court used on their own?
So it's actually interesting. This falls in sort of the latter camp where they adopt language as their own. But that said, they tried to split the baby and seem impartial by that first part where they said, oh, the First Amendment doesn't bar this, which is funny. So they're like, okay, look, you win. The First Amendment doesn't bar this claim. But then they backdoor it, but really it does, you know. so really this is like in sort of footnotes and you know, almost dicta to their thing. They said, but you know, it would bar it if we were to look at it from a different way. So
Christian has a comment or question.
Go ahead.
So I have a question about that last quote, determining whether the term tithing funds encompasses earnings would require an analysis of church doctrines and teachings. So assuming that they looked at what the church taught before this summary judgment or the granting of the summary judgment, from my experience, the church never talked about invested earnings on tithing funds. So I'm curious if you've seen the church change their rhetoric since the granting of the summary judgment to shift the narrative a little bit, so that as this lawsuit continues and goes further, if the law clerks were to start researching this, they'd start seeing teachings that would start to put earnings on invested tithing funds under the umbrella of tithing funds.
So that's a super good question. And to that, the answer is yes. After this case, the Gaddy case, and the whistleblower case especially, the church has really changed its narrative. So they're out there trying to inoculate against this. And this is, again, another feature of a church that is a massive corporation. They have these groups of lawyers that say, well, what we need to do to get out in front of this in the future is put out these kind of statements. So it probably wouldn't help a lot with this case, because they're not going to look at subsequent remedial actions for this case. They would look at what James Huntsman really believed at the time he paid, not what the church has said after. But they're still doing it to get out ahead of this, to keep other people like James Huntsman from saying, hey, I didn't understand what was going on. They're like, well, let's put out there as little as we have to inoculate against this. And you were actually seeing that in a lot of church publications. And it always makes me laugh when I see like an article from Deseret News or other church publications where you can see their verbiage on this has changed. All right, and this is another piece from that, like I said, that sort of the dicta, the non-holding part of it. The court says, to the extent plaintiff relies on Sunday school manuals. So this is kind of the thing that you'd think. You'd be like, well, James Huntsman did this. He's like, I was a member of this church since I was a child, and this is what the church taught me over and over and over and over. They said this, this, and this. Tithing would be used for A, B, and C, and D, and it was used for something else. And they said, to the extent plaintiff relies on Sunday school manuals or the church's teachings to support the claim regarding beneficial, this was specific for beneficial, the First Amendment prohibits plaintiff's claim. Resolving plaintiff's claim on those grounds would require a court or jury to determine whether the church teachings and doctrines prohibited the alleged transfer of tithing funds to beneficial. So they're like, to me, that seemed like a rock solid argument. Like, look, here are all these materials from the church, and they say tithing is going to be used for these things. Never once do they say that it's going to be used for commercial enterprises, like bailing out a for-profit insurance company. And they said, well, to the extent that we have to get in there and figure out what those Sunday school manuals or teachings mean, that would require too much. We have to get into the weeds of the church and adjudicate their beliefs. All right, so currently, this case is now on appeal. James Huntsman filed an appeal to the Ninth Circuit. And so if you look at this map, this is a circuit map that shows the different circuit courts of appeal. So in federal courts, there will be one or more federal courts in a state. California, I believe, has 4. You see them, the Northern, Eastern, Central, and Southern districts. Oregon has 1. But when you want to appeal, you appeal up to the circuit court. So California, where this case was filed in the Central District, goes up to the Ninth Circuit Court, which covers all of these states. If it was in Utah, it would have gone up to the 10th Circuit. And those are important because the courts have different compositions and different law, really, that they would typically apply the law from the state in which they're done, but they have different interpretations of federal law. And then from there, it would go to the Supreme Court. But essentially, James Huntsman's argument was, yes, there is an issue of material fact. He's saying, look at all this evidence I had that the church misled me, and I was reasonably misled. I think there's all this evidence. And he said, the fact that the church says, nuh-uh, isn't enough to grant summary judgment on. So the pleadings on this should go on for the next few months, and probably sometime later this year, we'll have a decision out of the Ninth Circuit. And that's where it stands.
Do you feel that, I think we're all hoping there might be some documents revealed or some financial information disclosed in the process that they will be compelled to release things that they normally wouldn't want people to know? Do you see any avenue that would happen?
Unfortunately, I don't. That's something that James Huntsman has pushed for, is he's really heavily pushing for disclosure. He's saying, look, all these things that you've shown me in this case, the things that you've used to defeat me, is important information that the members should have. If they could see the things that I was seeing, I think they would all be upset and they would all feel like they've been lied to. But I just don't see a reason why a court would force them to turn those over. As we talked about before, there's no legal requirement for the churches to disclose these things.
Is there anything he's going to change in the argument, or can he change the argument at all to cover some of these things, or is he stuck with the same argument and just has to hope they overturn it on the grounds of what he argued?
Yeah, it's the latter. So on appeal, you're basically just stuck with the issues that were in this is an appeal for summary judgment. So you're just stuck with those issues on which the court granted summary judgment. And you're stuck with the record before you. So you can't introduce new evidence, you can't add stuff to it. Just looking at the record on which the district court granted summary judgment.
Daniel, do you know, or anyone in the group, is there any precedence to all this? Like even outside of the LDS religion, is there success in suing religions over financial things? I know like with abuse and stuff, there's been some success, but do you know of any?
So yes and no. So there's been very little success trying to get back donations, like money that you've donated to a church. That's very difficult. One of the cases I'm familiar with where people did get money back was there was a church that was selling a van, and one of the pastors cracked open the odometer and rolled it back, and they sold the van, and the purchaser of the van sued the church for fraud. And the church said, hey, you can't sue us, we're a church. And the court said, no, this is purely secular. So a lot of this tithing stuff and donations to the church fall into a more gray ground where they're like, no, this was more about belief than it was about something else. But I think the Mormon church lies in a very specific, special area because they have been so secretive about their finances and so secretive what they're doing. And they've been so vocal about what this money would be used for. So they've been really painting a picture and really deceiving people about what this money was going to be used for. You know, they've told people, hey, we have a lay ministry, we're not going to pay people in the church. And then they pay people in the church behind the back. Oh, you know, we were not going to use it for commercial enterprises. And then they use it for commercial enterprises, you know, behind people's backs. Oh, we're not a wealthy church, you know, we have just enough for our needs, but we're not wealthy, but we do what we can. And then it turns out they're extremely wealthy. And you know, other churches, as we talked about before, some of them do disclosures. They disclose their finances and they tell people what they have. And so in that sense, if a church was completely transparent and disclosed their finances, it would be really hard for anyone to ever bring a fraud case against them, to say that they misrepresented or they lied. And I think the Mormon church occupies a special area there because they have been so secret about their finances, but also open about, they've been publicly open about how they're going to use their finances, but it's been sort of deceitful. And they've been so secretive about the way they're really using their finances.
Bruce, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, comment. Just my mother died on April 4th, and I paid her tithing on April 1st. And our temple worker CPA, when I met with him, I said, okay, is there any mechanism where I can get the tithing beyond the date of death back? And he just laughed at me.
Well, they're on the rolls after death for many years, so they should continue to pay tithing, of course.
Oh, after death, yeah. Well,
yeah.
That stopped.
No, that actually happens. I work in the financial industry also. I'm a financial administrative assistant. And so, yeah, we've had people that their parents have died and they want to pay up through the year, and gosh, end of tax season, I'm always, doing paperwork for people that are contributing. It's very disheartening, just to see in my little office out in Lehi, Utah, just the amount of money that flows through in their charitable
Can you get a
donations.
tax deduction for a charitable contribution by a dead person for that year?
That's a good question. Ren, can you help us on that? Or did Ren leave?
Yeah, they'll file a final tax return.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
So yeah, so to pay less tax, they'll take a charitable contribution. That may be
Right.
one of the reasons that whoever's managing their estate may want to do that. So.
Wow, that's funny because only two certainties in life: death and taxes. But it seems like taxes trump even death.
Tithing trumps death. That's what we've learned. So.
You know what bothers me most about this, and that it upsets me that the court doesn't seem to be taking into effect here, and I'm sure they're going to say, well, this is a legislative function, is nobody seems to be watching out for the people here, because they're basically saying the church, you can lie to them because you're a religion, and the people don't have a right to know, or they have no way of asking or going after you for it. You can protect it, you can hide it, you can move it, and the people, you don't have to be transparent about it, you don't have to show it, and they have the upper hand in every argument you make, that we don't have to.
And it's your fault if you don't catch it. It's your fault.
It's your fault. And yet the legislature, there is no way that a legislature in Utah is ever going to force the church to be transparent about its finances. There's no way you could get a legislature in Utah to pass a law saying you have to file your financials every year.
Yeah.
It would never happen, and you couldn't get it in the US because the churches would put so much money into the politicians' pockets to make sure that never got passed.
No, I completely agree. It's a problem, and there's something wrong with the system. Just think about if I went out to all my neighbors here and I was selling them on an investment for this company that made flying cars, and I was just selling them an investment, and I took in hundreds of thousands of dollars and I blew it, and then they all come sue me for fraud, and they say he didn't even have a flying car. I think it would be an open and shut case. I would lose that. But if I had just switched that to a religion, so I'm like, hey, this is the religion of the great flying car, and I want you to, give donations to the great religion of the flying car. So in the one case, they believed me. I was able to pitch them and get them to believe in this flying car, almost like a religious belief, right? With very little evidence, everything. It was something they wanted, something they felt good about. The pitch was really strong, and boom, they bought into it. Now, if I call it a religion, and it's all the same emotions, all the same feelings, that they buy into it and they give me money. Now the fact that I blow all that money and I don't have any flying car is a-okay. It just seems wrong.
Well, yeah, and the other side of that too is that you can even sell it to them even more because they're going to pay less in tax because they can deduct taxes as well. So,
but it seems to me that the average member of the church, and I say this, and Tom and Rebecca, you can weigh in on what you think, since we're related to many of the same people. But my guess is most members of the church, their eyes would glaze over as to how the church spends the money, because what they're really paying tithing for is because they view it as a commandment. They're buying their way into heaven. And I don't mean that in the super negative way it sounds, but it's one of the requirements to get into the heaven as they view it. They can go to the temple, they do all these things. That is why they pay their tithing, not because the church uses it for charitable purposes or uses it to build churches, or whether they use it to fund businesses or whatever it is they do. So my guess is the average church member is getting exactly what they think they are getting, regardless of how the church spends the money.
Yep, and that is the church's main argument. That's the church's main argument in these cases, is that tithing is not secular, tithing is spiritual. And people don't pay tithing based on any of our representations except for the fact that we tell them to do it.
Yeah,
And
because
that's,
it's in Malachi.
yep. And that's what they do.
Misinterpreted in Malachi, I must say.
Well, you know, that's why they call it fire insurance.
But,
exactly.
But that said, some of the church's own statements belie that a little bit. For instance, when the revelation was made about the $100+ billion they had, one of the statements made from a church spokesman was, we didn't want to tell people about that because we were afraid they would stop paying tithing. We were afraid that if they learned that we had that much money, they would stop paying tithing.
But that isn't fraud.
And blessings.
And you know, but I will say there's a lot of churches out there that are, at least in my opinion, very fraudulent. You know, I mean, but if you're going to have a separation of church and state, you have to allow the religions to operate as religions, and people's real remedy is if they care how the money's being spent, if they care, you know, what's going on in the church, you investigate it before you start paying, and then you can do it with your eyes open.
I 100% agree with that, but you can't investigate it if there's no records for you to investigate.
Yeah,
that's why if you have to have full disclosure, then you can, and you can say, okay, I know how it's being spent and I'm okay with that. And I continue to agree and contribute of my own free will. But if you're being told it's being spent one way and it's not, now that's where I have the problem.
Yeah, but then join the Methodists, you know, I mean, join a church where they do disclose if that is important to you. But as I said, my guess is the average Mormon, certainly the ones that I care that are very devout, they could not care less how the prophet of God spends the Lord's money.
Haven't you heard that the bishop can light your money on fire when you take the cash into the tithing settlement, and you don't care because you did what you were supposed to do. You handed it over. He can incinerate it all in front of you, and it's all good, and you're happy with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have to disagree a little bit with that, because all along, the way I was taught tithing was that tithing is sacred, and the church would only use it for the utmost best purposes. And so that was played into there. And it's hard to disambiguate that now from what I know about the way tithing is used, but that was part of it. And that seems, dishonest. And also sort of as evidence that there might be a change is, why isn't the church completely transparent? You know, why don't they tell people about how much all the general authorities make? Why don't they tell people about, signing bonuses for general authority? Why didn't they tell people how much they had? Well, there has to be a reason. And I think the most plausible reason is they think some people will stop paying their tithing because of that. Because I don't think any of the other reasons make any sense. I don't think that they're like, well, we're afraid people will follow our investment strategies, or we're afraid people will scrutinize too much what we're doing. That doesn't make any sense. I think the only viable reason is if they were honest about all those things, people would stop paying tithing.
I agree. I think we have comments from Troy, and then Marty Lynn or Kevin, and then Bruce. But before that, I wanted to say there was an article that I read today that I posted on Facebook talking about trendy tithing. Tom's changed his name to that. And it's exactly that. They're saying people are now actually finding charities they care about and donating to them, and not to the church. And it's of concern. The article, of course, took the stance that we're concerned about you because you're not getting the blessings by doing that. And it used words like self-centered charitable giver. I mean, but there is I know, wrap your brain around that one. There's a concern. People are starting to look at tithing in a different way. So, okay, Troy, then the Nelsons, then Bruce, then Melinda. Go ahead.
So what just steams my hide really is that they claim to be the prophets of God, and that they are representing Jesus Christ to us on earth. It's like they've never read the New Testament. They don't know anything about Jesus or who he was, or the kind of things that he represented. To think that Jesus would put his money into a mall and invest for the future and stuff. This is exactly the opposite of everything that Jesus taught. This is it drives me crazy that they pretend to be prophets and then they hide behind their lawyers. Where's the Alma and Amulek style prophets that made Jezreel, the evil lawyer, cry and so mentally ill that he was sick? They hide. They won't even take open questions. Anyway, it's disgusting to me.
Right. It seems like the Alma and Amulek of today's day would hire Jezreel. Like, that guy's pretty good. Let's hire him.
Exactly.
I appreciated Brad Johnson, I think that's who it was, his comments. It got me thinking. I agree. And so this is like an internal battle that I have. Like, would I care if I hadn't invested so much and then my beliefs changed? Because when I was donating that money, it's weird because my belief was in the corporation. The corporation was true. Like, it wasn't just any regular corporation that I would donate money to. Like, if I were donating to the Red Cross, I'd want to know how much of that dollar actually went to the charity. Like how much was overhead. I'd want to know all those things. But when I was donating to the church, I was okay with the overhead because, I understood the money was used to run things, right? But anyway, so
It's fascinating. And the thing that, like I said, it makes me think about most is, were those emotions really much different than somebody who invested in Theranos? Because people invested in Theranos because they believed in it. They felt it. They're like, oh man, I feel good about it. And we know now from psychology that the spirit and those feelings are actually probably exactly the same. So on a biological level, those two things are exactly the same. So in one case, it's fraud recognizable by the law. And in the other case, it's a religion, because they're like, in the Theranos case, they didn't ask anybody. They weren't like, but did you believe it? Like, did you really believe it? And it's identical, because in some of those cases, people were presented with evidence. They're like, this can't be. And they're like, no, it doesn't matter. And it wasn't until the whole thing came crashing down that they finally didn't believe it anymore. And at that point, they wanted their money back. But even in the face of all of this evidence, all of these things that showed that it was completely a fraud, all these things, they denied it, because they had good feelings about it.
right. Yeah. And the other thought I had too was when you watch President Hinckley, when he was on with Larry King, he was asking about finances too. And one of the things he said was, that's not for the world to know, that's for us to know. And I was like, when he said that, and I can't remember if I was still with it or not, but I remember thinking, well, wait a minute, I am in and I still don't know. Like, you haven't told me, and I should know because I'm part of the in group. Like, so I remember that bothered me, because he made it sound like somehow the church members know, but we don't know any more than the rest of the world.
Probably less. Bruce, did you have a comment? And then Melinda, and then Landon.
Yeah, I just have a technical question. Am I paying, my trendy tithing the church by spending tremendous amounts of money at the Apple store, and the church is the landlord of an Apple store in City Creek Mall? I'm just trying to figure that out, because I may be paying.
Going to Disneyland. Yeah, Disney, all of it.
Yeah.
It's a good point. Melinda.
All right, so kind of first to address Marty Lynn a little bit, I can tell you from a personal experience, and I might have shared this before in book club, but Lannon was out before I was. And so when our second son decided to go on a mission, Lannon was out, and I went to him and said, hey, I know how you feel about the church. I know, like, he wasn't paying his tithing. I still was. I said, you know what? Let me pay for his mission. I will take that on. And shortly after that is when the church announced that the mission payment would go up to $500. So that really made me scared, because I do not make as much money as Landon does. And so I was really worried about coming up with that extra $100. And then, of course, fast forward to November or December, whenever the leaky source came out, and you know, it was exposed that they had all this money in the bank, and I was I was still in at that time, and that really bothered me. I mean, I was like, are you kidding me? And then I thought, when our first son went on a mission, I was a part of like a social media Facebook group called Missionary Mamas. And it wasn't until I was part of that and reading those comments that I realized how many families were not just supporting one missionary, but when they changed the age of missionaries, they were now supporting two missionaries, a son and a daughter, because of that age change. And then I was really surprised by how many families were supporting three missionaries out. And that just, I had never thought of that before. And so really, to find out the church is, you know, has that kind of money and we don't use it for even the missionary program, you know, it was a huge problem for me. Oh, in fact, I would dare say that was a turning point for me. But my other couple of things I wanted to share, Lana and I were in San Antonio this weekend for Memorial Day, and on our plane ride home, flying from Denver to Salt Lake, I was sitting next to a millennial. He's probably mid to late 20s, I would say. And he was very chatty, and so am I. So we had a conversation the entire ride to Salt Lake, and turned out he shared with me that he was an atheist. So he shared that with me first. And then as our discussion went on, he shared with me that he was raised a Catholic and he lives in Utah. And so we were discussing all sorts of stuff. Of course, I shared with him that I was no longer a Mormon. And when we started talking about tithing, and in particular the temple, like, he had a huge problem with that. And I realized he is also an ex-religionist, I guess, but I, again, made me think about how others view the church. I mean, he had several beefs, I should say, with the church. And I won't go into all of that, but it was a very interesting conversation. But my last thing I wanted to ask Daniel, not as my lawyer, but with someone who knows a great deal about law where I do not, do you think there's really anything that someone like a more lay person like myself, or even a huntsman, but that they would have success? Is there any avenue that you could see, or that you've even heard of, that perhaps there is some way to make the church sting a little, I guess?
You know, again, like I said, you're not my client, but the advice I always give to my clients is tell the truth and start with the truth. So if you're looking at yourself and you're saying, you know what, I was honestly giving tithing, just, you know, no matter what. If you were the kind of person that was like, I will do what the church says, no matter what, I have no questions, and that's why you were giving your tithing, then under the current laws in the United States, I don't think there's much you can do to get it back. But on the other hand, if you're honest with yourself and you're like, you know, I was deceived. If I had known that general authorities were pulling in, you know, $200,000+ a year, when supposedly we have a lay ministry. If they're pulling in $200,000 a year, they have housing provided, they get all these bonuses, they get these lucrative book deals, they make so general authorities in the church are making, you know, millions and millions of dollars for unpaid clergy. And not only that, but they get these signing bonuses where when they become a general authority, they pay off their houses and they get $1 million+ and all these things. Like, if you honestly ask yourself and say, you know what, if I had known that, I don't think I would have paid my tithing. I think that I would have had some serious concerns. That would have been a problem for me. If that's the truth, then I think you may have a case. You know, it's impossible to give you odds on winning that case. But if you really, if you ask yourself and you feel like you were deceived, then that's really the hallmark of having a decent case.
Well, even if it was something beyond tithing, I mean, just like, and I know you addressed this a little bit, and maybe it just gets too sticky, but I mean, I feel like I've been deceived on many levels, not just tithing. So I didn't know if there was another avenue besides a financial, or if you really think it just has to be some sort of secular. It can't be like they abused me in some sort of way and it didn't even have to be physical, or, you know, I just didn't know if there was anything that, and not that I'm considering suing the church, but I'm curious if you felt like there was just something that could be a tad more successful than what we've currently been seeing.
Yeah, so yeah, we've been talking about tithing cases, but we've seen the Boy Scout abuse cases, and we're seeing other abuse cases against the church where the church covers up things in violation of societal norms and lots of laws. Those are cases for which the church should definitely be held liable. Again, there's going to be various degrees of success in those cases, but all of those ones where the church had some sort of duty and they didn't live up to it. As far as a lot of other things like CES letter topics, we were like, they lied to me. Like, that's a total lie. That one is going to be really hard. Like I said, that really went to the heart of the Gaddy case. The Gaddy case was basically all these CES letter issues. And they're like, the church totally lied. Look, they said it was this way, but in reality, it was this way. It was a rock and a hat. You know, they said that the first vision happened this way, but in reality, it happened this way. And like, it's all these different things. Those things really get into the level of beliefs and doctrines. And those are going to be really challenging to litigate and to win.
Do you think if there was even just a matter of volume, if all of a sudden there were thousands of cases, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Is that any, again, I know very little about the law. Would that influence the courts in any way to be like, what is going on here? All of a sudden we have 10,000 cases against the LDS church.
I'm not sure that it would, but it might. It would definitely open some eyes and get people thinking. And
maybe you could change some laws about transparency or something, like that they would have to disclose certain things that to their population, like from them, because there's things that I would not listen to because it wasn't published by the church, and so I wouldn't believe it. So it's almost like there's a certain set of information they need to disclose directly over the pulpit or something. I don't know.
Yep. And that could be something that, like, filing those cases would have that effect, is would get the attention of politicians who might in your state require disclosure laws. Or
I'd be happy if we could get Brigham Young's statue out of the Capitol in Washington.
Well, I think there's a lot of support from a lot of people. I think we'll finish with Landon and then Ren and then see if Daniel has any last comment. But I was going to say that I actually reached out to Huntsman's lawyer and had a email exchange asking if there's anything we could do. I was thinking of our book club and the reach, contact, just an amicus brief, which is a document where you show support for a lawsuit, because the church filed an amicus brief with other churches that said, oh yeah, none of us want to disclose anything, right? These people back us up. So I'm like, well, where's our backing? I wasn't even sure if James Huntsman or his lawyer understood that there's a huge network of post-Mormons that can be accessed from so many different avenues. And the lawyer told me that, it was too late to file one. It had to be 7 days, after the initial, after it was initially filed. But, who knows, in a future case, something like that. I think there's a lot of power in all of us together, and a lot of us feel the same way, and there may be some way to do some of this in the future, just at least to show support. So, okay, Landon, Ren, and then Daniel, last words, and then we'll let everybody get back to their Tuesday nights. Although this is so fascinating, it's amazing. Go ahead, Landon.
All right. Well, I guess two things. One thing is, isn't there a difference though between a belief and something that you clearly now know is wrong, and yet you teach the opposite of it, which is the case in the church now? They certainly know some things are not what they say they are and continue to teach those. That to me is now fraud. So I don't know if you can address that.
Yes, I can address that first one. And the court addressed that in the Gaddy case. And they said the trouble with that is determining which version of the story is true. They said, so you're right, but how are we going to determine which version of the story is true? Then we've got to get in and adjudicate that and figure out.
Well, for instance, DNA of were the Lamanites over the land bridge, or were they actual descendants of that can be proven scientifically at this point, you know, and for them to keep saying that they did come from these people can be pretty well proven.
True, but we can also prove that people don't resurrect from the dead. So,
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's so, you know, again, it's problematic, but that's exactly the example they gave is like, hey, science shows people don't resurrect from the dead, but we're not going to go now adjudicate the claims of all the Christian churches in the United States against, you know.
The other thing I was going to say is really more of a statement, I guess, than a question. But one thing that has disappointed me, and I appreciated Brad's, you know, comment, because some people are going to pay tithing no matter what, and I agree with that, and I agree with the right to do that. I'm, you know, if people want to give their money to the church, and I absolutely agree with that. You know, I just want it to be transparent as to what they're giving it goes for, and that's fine with me. But as an atheist now, I find that I am once again paying tithing, even though I'm not paying tithing, because of this tax-free benefits that the churches are getting. And I see, you know, in Utah with this corporation that's worth hundreds of billions of dollars that's paying no taxes, that should be the largest tax-producing entity in the entire state. And with the lands that they have and stuff, my property taxes should be way less than they are. And my, you know, my taxes that I'm paying to the state should be well less than they are, because that corporation should be paying a percentage of taxes. So I am again paying taxes now to offset taxes not being paid by this corporation, in which case I'm basically paying the tithing, a second tithing in the form of a tax from the tax freedom that they have. And I believe we just came back from Texas, and I saw the price of housing in Texas compared to Utah. And Utah's not California. I can't figure out why the housing prices are what they are in Utah. We don't have beaches and oceans and nice weather. And the only thing I can explain is that there's just no land here, because the church and the government owns it all. So the prices just soared because of that. And so I sit there and I say, I feel like I'm being I'm paying again, even though I left the church, because of the fact that that they don't pay any. They're not paying a portion of that to cover any of the things that they cover. And you look at a church every block and whatnot, and you're going, certainly they're not paying their fair share into what they're getting out of it. So that's just my statement. So.
No, I agree. And I think, you mean, your statement and your frustration again highlights this problem of having these mega corporations that are churches. You know, are you a mega corporation, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, or are you a church? You know, which one are you? And the fact that they can take advantages of both. They can have all the corporate advantages of being a corporation, but they can also be a church and take all those advantages. Just, it doesn't seem quite right.
Ren, and then Troy.
Yeah, just real quick, I wanted to just say one of the reasons I know from personal experience of why I paid tithing, I didn't have any issues with how the church would use it or anything like that. I think I was raised that way, but my dad also taught me that it's almost kind of like this prosperity gospel type thing, where if you're righteous and it's true and things like that, then you're going to have success, whether that's worldly, spiritually, whatever it is. I was kind of raised. So when we see the church doing so well, like I know lots of people in my own family and my own parents think it's the greatest thing in the world that the church is so wealthy. That must mean it's true, because why else would they be gathering so much wealth? So it's just super frustrating to hear that.
That's such a good point. I hear that over and over. I dated a guy in college that said, "Be with me. I promise you, I'm going to pay so much tithing." It wasn't Tom. So you're right, prosperity gospel, absolutely. Troy.
So the last thing that I want to add is that the argument that, okay, we pay tithing and then they invest the tithing and then all of a sudden it's not tithing anymore, to me it's ridiculous, especially using their own argument, which is that the money is the Lord's, right? And then you just ridiculous. It just really, really bothers me.
Yeah, and again, that all of that comes back to this craziness of the interplay between it being a corporation and the church. We saw in this case, the court was like, well, look, they have clearly laid out that they have made a distinction between like proceeds on tithing and tithing. And the church can use whatever terms it wants to use inside of its church, because tithing and all those things, those are ecclesiastical terms. So have at it, Mormon church, do whatever you want. And as long as you're operating within those bounds, go ahead. We can't do anything about it. And I don't have a solution for it. I don't know what the answer is, but I do think it's highly problematic.
Any final statement for us, or do we all just need to?
Yeah. No,
I
but
don't want to leave angry.
great presentation. You
Yeah,
know,
it was amazing.
I just
So
seen this
fascinating.
at a very high level, and now I have abandoned all hope.
Oh, that's what I mean. I don't want to leave angry. Well, just so you know, Daniel, John DeLynne's a member of our book club, and he's just been texting me going, who's giving this presentation? Who are they? What do they know? Would they be? So I don't know. You'll have to think about this.
Well, so the one piece that maybe give you a little bit of hope is that these cases keep coming. And if you look at a lot of things like this, like the Boy Scout cases, well, when the first Boy Scout abuse cases started coming, they were dead losers. Loss after loss after loss after loss. But as the cases kept coming, they kept honing their legal arguments, and more disclosures kept happening. More things about what the Boy Scouts were doing kept coming out, whether through leaks, whistleblowers, and other things. So to give you a little bit of last hope with the church, as we get more and more information, as we have more people leaking information, as we find out more and more, some of these cases might get legs and be successful.
Well, that's positive. Let's end on that positive note. So
I feel like there's a Me Too movement kind of come forth. It's
there
gonna be
might
a
be. I don't know.
Me
All right,
Too or something. I don't know.
let's go to our final slide and we'll say goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much for attending. And thank you, Daniel. That was just amazing. Like I learned
Thanks,
so
everyone.
much. My brain's about to explode. So that was our next. I think we have a slide for our book to remind everybody. Yes, God is Not One. This is an awesome book. If you haven't started reading, read and download and listen. June 12th, it's going to be 11 a.m. and Nelson is going to be our presenter. It's going to be really, really good. Last slide. Again, connect with us however you can. Email me for information right there. Join our Facebook group page. That's really fun. We have a lot of fun talking and chatting and sharing ideas. And the links to these meetings, these book club for post-Mormon dummies, are posted there in our library. So you can go back. This is our 4th. They've just been amazing. You can go back and click on any that you missed and watch them. And we've had amazing presenters. I also would put a call out to anyone else who has an idea for a book club for dummies. It can be anything. And so far, all of our presenters have been book club members, which I love. It would also be fun to bring somebody in if you know somebody that would be good at something or any kind of topic. So text me, email me, throw out ideas. I think these are really fun. It's fun to get together and talk. So, all right. I think, yes, Bruce?
I'm just going to stop the recording. So
okay, perfect. I think we're done then. Thank you, everybody, for spending an hour or so on this. It was really fascinating. I think we all need to detox now and do some self-care because we might be a little distraught. Although the presentation was amazing. It's just kind of like